The evolution of Somali-linked fraud in the United States. In every society, there are stories we rush to simplify, and stories that deserve patience. Today's story is not about a people. It is not about culture. It is not about refugees, faith, or identity. It is about crime, systems, opportunity, and human choice. Specifically, this documentary explores how fraud schemes involving certain Somali-linked networks have evolved in the United States over the last 3 decades, as documented in court records, law enforcement investigations, and investigative journalism. And as we move through this timeline, we'll ask difficult but necessary questions. How do vulnerable systems become targets? How does survival blur into exploitation? And at what point does opportunity become moral failure? Before we proceed, watch this report.
We accept the president's words. They came from a place of anger and disappointment. I'm sure many Americans feel the same way.
The president was right to let loose his feelings. It shocked us into understanding the severity of the harm our people caused.
These criminals betrayed America's welcoming spirit. The scale of these crimes has stained the reputation of American Somalis.
America's freedoms allowed us to build a unique community here in Minnesota. In return, we must promise to weed out any evil living among us.
This evil came from within our community. And so, as an honorable community, we take responsibility. We must correct this wrongdoing.
The only way to regain the trust of this nation is to root out crime, stay humble, and be forever grateful. That's the premise.
So, as honorable Somalis, we are going to take on the responsibility of apologizing to all Americans. We are deeply, deeply sorry.
The shame of this will haunt us forever. And hopefully over time you will come to forgive us. Thank you.
1990s to early 2000s, migration and early financial exploitation. The story begins in the 1990s. Civil war collapses the Somali state. Families flee violence, famine, and instability. The United States becomes home to one of the largest Somali refugee populations in the world, with major resettlements in Minnesota, Ohio, Washington, and California. These were communities rebuilding from nothing, learning a new language, navigating unfamiliar systems, and trying to survive. In these early years, fraud was not organized. There were no large criminal networks. There were no sophisticated schemes. Instead, what appeared were isolated cases of benefit misuse. Some involved welfare overpayments. Others involved paperwork confusion, often tied to naming conventions, translation gaps, or mismatched documentation. Ask yourself, when someone is dropped into a system they barely understand, where does misunderstanding end and accountability begin? Most of these cases were administrative, not criminal, but they revealed something important. Government systems were fragile, and complexity created openings, intentional or not. Mid-2000s. Emergence of organized benefit fraud. By the mid-2000s, the landscape begins to change. Small, informal networks emerge, often family-based or community-connected. These were not gangs in the traditional sense, but loosely coordinated groups exploiting shared knowledge. The focus shifts toward public assistance programs such as SNAP, food stamps, SSI, and disability benefits. Medicaid billing irregularities. What changed? Experience. People learned how the system worked, which forms mattered, which agencies didn't cross-check, which benefits could be layered without triggering alarms. Authorities begin noticing patterns, repeated addresses, clusters of claims, similar diagnoses, and service providers appearing again and again. And here's the uncomfortable question. When fraud becomes normalized within a small circle, does it still feel like crime, or does it start to feel like strategy? 2010 to 2014, expansion into identity, tax, and early provider fraud. The next phase marks a turning point. Technology enters the picture. Between 2010 and 2014, Somali-Linked networks begin expanding into identity theft and tax refund fraud. This includes filing tax returns using stolen identities, operating shell tax preparation businesses, coordinating filings across multiple states. Addresses are reused. Returns are timed carefully. Refunds are funneled through layered accounts. At the same time, early signs of provider-based fraud begin to surface, particularly in healthcare-adjacent services. Small clinics, transport services, and care providers appear on paper, even when real service delivery is minimal. For the first time, federal indictments identify multi-state Somali networks operating in coordinated ways. So pause and reflect. What happens when crime becomes technical? When knowledge replaces desperation? When fraud becomes a profession? 2015 to 2018, professionalization, daycare fraud, and federal attention. By 2015, fraud operations become fully professionalized. Networks establish front businesses, including fake or inflated medical clinics, phony transportation services, home care providers billing for non-existent patients, childcare and daycare centers that existed mostly on paper. This is where one of the most disturbing patterns emerges: empty daycare centers, particularly in Minnesota. Investigators later discovered childcare facilities that claimed reimbursement for dozens or even hundreds of children, operated in vacant buildings or minimally furnished spaces, had little to no daily attendance, submitted inflated meal counts, care hours, and staffing records. In some cases, inspectors found no children present at all during operating hours. Watch this report.
Here we go. All right, we've arrived to ABC Learning Center. All the windows are blacked out. Let's see if anybody is here. This door is locked.
This facility is licensed for 40 children. 0 children. I've come by this place 100 times. I've never seen a child here, ever. The only thing I've ever seen is someone standing outside smoking.
What's crazy? Daycare.
I haven't seen anybody in here.
We're going to educate you on something. So what do you think about this daycare center? They spelled learning wrong. They've received over $1.9 million this year alone, and they're supposed to have 99 children here.
I don't see it.
99 children.
Have you ever seen any children here?
None at all. None.
This year they got 1.9 million. Last year they got 1.5 million of your tax money for 99 children. We just want to know, where are the kids?
Right.
Where are the children?
I don't see them. I've been here since 2017. I haven't seen anybody like
Never
that here.
seen a child here.
No, not at all.
And so you've
8
never
years.
seen a child here for 8 years?
Nope, not at all.
Ask yourself, how does a system designed to feed and protect children become a pipeline for theft? What does it mean when fraud steals not just money, but trust meant for families? Medicaid, Medicare, and childcare assistance programs become prime targets, large, complex, and overwhelmed. Federal task forces escalate their response, targeting money laundering, layered shell companies, overseas remittances linked to fraud proceeds. Public scrutiny intensifies, especially in Minnesota, where daycare and nonprofit fraud cases dominate headlines. 2020 to 2021, COVID-19 relief fraud boom. Then comes the pandemic. COVID-19 shatters the global economy, and governments respond with unprecedented emergency aid, programs like PPP loans, unemployment insurance, EIDL grants. Pandemic-era childcare and food programs were built for speed, not scrutiny, and criminal networks moved instantly. Fraud during this period reaches historic levels. Schemes involve straw business owners, fake payrolls, daycare centers claiming emergency food aid for children who did not exist, coordinated applications across multiple states. Some cases involved tens of millions of dollars, with childcare fraud becoming one of the most visible symbols of systemic failure. This marks the largest scale of fraud ever tied to Somali-linked networks. But this moment raises a broader question. How many safeguards are we willing to remove in a crisis, and at what cost? 2022 to 2025. Crackdowns, convictions, and persistent networks. The response from authorities is real and, at times, forceful. Beginning in 2022, the Department of Justice launches sweeping conspiracy cases targeting large-scale daycare, nonprofit, healthcare, and COVID-era fraud networks. The outcomes are significant. Long prison sentences handed down to ringleaders, massive asset forfeitures, including homes, vehicles, and overseas funds, public trials that expose the inner workings of daycare centers that existed largely on paper, nonprofits without real beneficiaries, and clinics without real patients. Investigators deploy increasingly advanced tools, financial intelligence systems that trace complex money flows, social network analysis to map relationships across families, businesses, and shell entities, cross-agency data sharing that closes loopholes once exploited for years. Importantly, many Somali community leaders publicly denounce the fraud, particularly the misuse of daycare and food programs meant for children. Some cooperate with authorities, calling out criminal behavior as a betrayal of both public trust and community values. This moment matters. Because it raises a moral question that goes beyond indictments, who is willing to speak when silence protects the wrong people? Yet even as convictions mount, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. Enforcement alone does not dismantle an ecosystem. 2024-2025. Containment, adaptation, and ongoing fraud. By 2024 and into 2025, the fraud landscape has changed, but it has not disappeared. Large, headline-grabbing COVID-era schemes have been disrupted, and many fraudulent daycare operations have been shut down. Oversight is undeniably tighter. Licensing rules are more stringent. Inspections are more frequent and data-driven. Cross-checks between agencies are stronger than before. However, despite these efforts, daycare fraud and other organized fraud networks continue to surface, often in modified forms. Some daycare centers reopen under new names. Others operate just enough to appear legitimate. Paper compliance replaces genuine service. Meanwhile, fraud activity shifts toward areas that are harder to see and easier to obscure. Smaller, decentralized healthcare fraud schemes, synthetic identity fraud, blending real and fake information, financial manipulation that avoids physical locations altogether, continued exploitation of grant programs, subsidies, and community-based funding. Law enforcement increasingly emphasizes prevention over reaction, community education and whistleblower engagement, stricter financial compliance, including closer scrutiny of remittance and nonprofit funding channels. And yet, a sobering reality remains. As long as systems offer high reward with low immediate risk, some networks will adapt faster than reforms can move. Key patterns and closing reflection. Looking across 3 decades, several patterns remain unmistakable. A shift from individual misuse to organized, institutional fraud. Repeated exploitation of emergency programs, childcare systems, and healthcare. Constant adaptation by criminal networks as enforcement tightens. Growing sophistication on both sides of the battle. But beneath all timelines and prosecutions lies a deeper truth. Fraud is not cultural, it is structural. It thrives where oversight is uneven, accountability is delayed, and moral lines are quietly blurred. And so the final questions remain, unresolved, but necessary. How do we protect children, families, and taxpayers without turning compassion into vulnerability? How do we punish real crime without condemning entire communities? And how do we build systems where help cannot be hijacked again and again? Because the real lesson here isn't just about fraud. It's about responsibility, trust, and what happens when systems forget who they were built to serve.